Hope everyone is having a great afternoon. This is Atmospheric Alex here, coming at you with a tropical weather update for July 24th, 2024. So as we currently take a look at our water vapor satellite imagery, we can see a bunch of dry air currently ongoing from your Saharan dust, out across the main development region that originally came from Africa, and a ton of convection here across the western Atlantic. This whole area is already moistened up and will probably cause problems later on as we head into August once all this dust can, well, abate out of here. So here's a current look at your sea surface temperatures here for July 23rd. This is a day behind, but you get the idea. We are talking about still continued very hot waters here across basically much of the Atlantic at this point, reaching around 29, 30, even 31 degrees Celsius in some areas, especially in the Gulf here. Along the Gulf Coast into Florida, we're talking about temperatures that are nearing the upper 80s and even getting close to low 90s already, which you would typically see more towards mid-September. And then across all other areas, temperatures continue to maintain in the mid-80s. Now here's a look at one of your other estimates for sea surface temperatures. This is the ocean heat content here. This is basically how long a tropical system can survive for in such conditions. This is measured in units. And you can see there is a lot of it here across the Caribbean and the Gulf here, especially in the Western Caribbean. We're seeing values upwards of 160 to near 180 in some localized areas. And you wouldn't typically see this until mid to even late September. Problem is we're only in late July, so we have a long way to go before we reach the peak of this. Another thing important about ocean heat content is it also tells you, how far down these warm waters go. So the higher the value, the more likely these storms will upwell warm waters rather than cold waters. So we're seeing here very high values here, 170 to 185 here across some portions of the Western Caribbean. That is very unusual for this time of year. We would only typically see that, like I said, mid to late September. If even that, to be honest, it's already rare enough to get units that are this high for those areas, let alone in late July. And we're also seeing a nice spike of it here across the loop current in the Gulf of Mexico. Another eddy here, upwards around 125 to 150. If a major hurricane were to trek up through here, well, that would be probably the worst case scenario. Okay, here's a look at your extended GEFS ensemble model here. And what we're going to be doing is taking a look at how much moisture is in the air. And this is a normalized anomaly actually averaged over a 30-year time period. So this is the best way to see this in real time. Okay, so right now we currently see a big plume of Saharan dust entering the main development region into the Caribbean into late July here. And you start to notice less of that here. As we go into early August, we see a lot more moisture pumping off of Africa rather than dry air. And this is something we really need to monitor here because the more moisture there is, really the higher chance there is of tropical development here in terms of convection, thunderstorm sustainability here. And we even see that across the Caribbean. Well, this area is already pretty moistened up, so we'd have nothing to worry about there in terms of dry air, unfortunately. And as we continue through time, this belt of moisture continues along the intertropical convergence zone down here, which will actually start to lift north through time. And this is basically where your tropical systems will form, and it'll cause them to track, more towards the north and impact more areas than if they were further south. They would crash and burn probably into Central America. This is something very important to note here. And continuing to look at this here, you can see your zone begins to lift further north as advertised. Your high pressure begins to strengthen a little bit more, and your moisture becomes more dominant across a lot of areas here. And your dry air, well, gets kicked right out of the way. So that is what we're really seeing here. I'm going to fast forward to the end of the loop here. And you could see a very constant stream of moisture at this point, which, it's looking rather concerning out there as your Saharan air fades away. Now for your wind shear anomalies, I'll take your attention down here to the Caribbean, where we have a persistent belt of wind shear that kind of stays over this region here of the Greater Antilles, but you do notice it does start to wane a little bit here. Still, 30, 35 knots of wind shear. But let's consider this for a moment. Let's say you have a tropical wave out here. Let's say you have a tropical wave out here in the main development region, and it tracks roughly like this. Well, you can see here we have almost no wind shear over this part of the main development region, meaning this hurricane, this hypothetical hurricane, could rapidly to even explosively intensify over these waters. And so by the time it enters this pocket of wind shear out here, it can't die. It's already too strong, and it will try to manipulate the environment around it. So while this may look like, a beneficial, thing setting up across, it really isn't. It's not going to help as much as you would think. And that's just why I'm so concerned about this hurricane season being very impactful, is that even so we have this belt of wind shear, it won't do much to systems that are already very intense like this. And I would even like to note you have a nice kind of, call in your winds right here, which is just going to lead to even more intense development, unfortunately, through time. But as we continue to look through time here, just even less wind shear. This right here is not at all what you want to see. We're talking about just an area here that has basically no wind shear on the map at all. Again, like I said, you get a tropical system, tracks through there, and then look at the Gulf. This is just even worse. You basically have no wind shear in the Gulf either. So your only spot to really stop these storms is the Caribbean. If they can't be stopped there, then I would be very concerned, like I said, along the mid-Atlantic coastline, southeast into the Gulf Coast. You need to be on high alert, and I'm being serious about that. Check the National Hurricane Center daily at this point, just in case anything, gets issued out here, something you see, a nice little X that develops here, a nice little area to watch or something, because anything in the Caribbean, now another weather YouTuber says this, so I'm going to say it too, if anything forms in the Caribbean, everybody needs to monitor it. Everybody needs to prepare, because it could impact anyone at that point. And no matter what way it goes, if it, forms here, well, if it goes north, it's going straight, say, into the Dominican Republic, the Greater Antilles. If it somehow goes east, I don't think it would do that, well, the Lesser Antilles are involved. If it goes west, well, Central America is involved. And if it takes your traditional track, well, the entire Gulf Coast might be involved. So just, please, be on high alert this hurricane season. Now let's kind of speed run through this part here. This is your ensemble model here, showing individual systems. They're not all systems, heading towards the US or anything. Don't worry about that. This is just what the members are picking up on. So let's actually rewind the clock. You can see possible development here in the Yucatan Peninsula. I think there's a low chance of this, but there will be a brief period of slightly more favorable conditions there. As we continue, you begin to see, your lower pressure anomalies across the main development region, some of which do develop into systems out here. If it takes the right track, it could become rather significant. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but just if it does, that could be rather significant. You can see some of your members there as well. Just like I said, be on alert. Now, this graphic is extremely important, and I want you all to listen up closely. This is the Atlantic hurricane and tropical storm activity kind of guidance here. And this is the storms per day over the past 100 years. So it's averaged over 100 years. This is very accurate. And you would even call this climatology. So you are currently here right now. Where I put that little dot, that is where we are currently located in that little dip. Typically, around this time, we see a lot of Saharan dust, so limited activity. Now, as we continue up this, huge mountain, if you will, this first mountain to climb, as we go into early to mid-August, our activity goes through its first spike. Now, it's really a 50-50 shot whether or not you will see activity through this time. Look at this huge mountain, Everest, if you will, that we have to climb here. And by the time we reach September 10th here, we are talking about the peak of hurricane season here. So this is when, you'll have the most amount of storms in the basin, possibly. It could be a few days before or after that. That is genuinely when you'll see your activity. And then it starts sharply decreasing as we head into the fall and then the winter time as well. Again, this is climatology. Straight facts. There is no hype with this whatsoever. And hey, speaking of climatology, let's look at your European model real quick. Let's just kind of look at it and see what it shows, right? Well, remember that first peak I was showing you going into early August? Well, lo and behold, we have a bit of a tropical wave here. And look at this, it pushes into the Greater Antilles and potentially becomes a tropical depression. This is one model though, but this is the more accurate model. So, definitely put a little bit of weight into this. If you're in the Greater Antilles, you should already be preparing, because if this doesn't happen, well, there sure as well will be something later in the season that could be far worse that'll impact your area. So you should already be preparing for what's ahead. So we'll just have to see if this forms or not. And that takes me straight into the ensemble model here for this supposed system. We're talking about them forming up in the northern main development region here and tracking through the Greater Antilles and possibly up towards Florida. Now again, this is, I will point, 240 hours out. This is 10 days out. That is, at that point, your certainty will begin to drop off really fast. So don't take this for granted. I will note your steering flow though, so there's really no chance of it escaping out to sea, unfortunately. It's gonna unfortunately keep heading off to our west here. So just kind of bear in mind that we have the chance. And if you were to look at a potential outcome here, you have one that shows a hurricane, I wouldn't put any stock into this as of right now. Well, that about does it for this video. I hope you all have enjoyed greatly. If you did, please be sure to hit the like button. That'll help me grow my little corner of the weather community here as we get more and more information out to more and more people who are impacted. And with that being said, have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.